Lively debate. The House Judiciary Committee holds a marathon session ahead of a vote on articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump. Financial scandal. A report in the Wall Street Journal is focusing on the Pope's main charitable appeal and how the Vatican uses the funds. We're in Rome. Our Lady of Guadalupe. Pilgrims gather in Mexico City to honor the patron saint of the Americas. And making spirits bright. An entrepreneur opens up a Christmas-themed bar in the nation's capital. How he connects celebration and community to his Catholic faith. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, December 12th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. The House Judiciary Committee debates articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump. Their historic vote will send the issue to the full House. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us with the story. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. The House Judiciary Committee is going through each line of these articles of impeachment. Democrats started by having all 9 pages of the articles read out loud, but Republicans are trying to scrap it all.
I mean, if you got a case, make it, but don't make it up because you don't have it.
The first charge accuses the president of abuse of power. That's for holding up aid to Ukraine while asking the country to investigate Joe Biden.
Will any one of my colleagues on the other side say that it is an abuse of power to condition aid on official acts?
Republicans say the president was fighting corruption, and that's not impeachable.
In the history of our country, the party who is not in the White House has accused the White House of abuse of power. It started 200 years ago. It will continue into the future, except now, congratulations. It will be impeachment every single time one party controls the House of Representatives and the other party is in the White House.
The second charge, obstruction of Congress.
Donald J. Trump has directed the unprecedented, categorical, and indiscriminate defiance of subpoenas issued by the House of Representatives pursuant to its sole power of impeachment.
What's his big infraction here? He asserted a legitimate executive privilege and legal immunity to question subpoenas issued by various White House officials. There's no evidence of any impeachable conduct with that. It's very commonplace.
The country watches this marathon debate session, and lawmakers wait to take their turn as they weigh to impeach or not to impeach President Donald Trump.
So after the committee vote today, it will go to the full House for debate and vote next week, and from there it goes on to the Senate. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the Senate trial will likely happen after the college football bowl games, so sometime next year. Wyatt?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. Joining me now from Capitol Hill is Congressman Jody Hice, Republican from Georgia. He's also a member of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform. Congressman, welcome back to the program. It appears more likely that the articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump will move to a full vote before the entire House. What are your thoughts as you watch all of this play out?
Yeah, you know, I believe you're exactly right. This is going to probably go to a full vote in the House. I would anticipate probably next week. That being said, there are already a number of Democrats who are beginning to bail ship, if you will, because they realize that this whole impeachment inquiry lacks one critical issue, and that is evidence. There's no evidence that the president has done anything worthy of impeachment, and the polls across the country likewise reflect that. So we are seeing defectors within the Democratic Party, but nonetheless, I'm still anticipating that it is going to go to the House for a full vote probably sometime next week.
You mentioned the Democrats. You also tweeted about the Democrats saying, quote, they're weaponizing impeachment for political purposes. What do you think Democrats are hoping to accomplish in all of this?
You know, they have been actually rather vocal about what their intent is. In fact, Jerry Nadler, chairman of the Judiciary, just last night, in essence said that we cannot count on the election to get rid of President Trump. I mean, that in itself says what this entire impeachment inquiry has been about. In fact, from the day that the president was inaugurated, the very next day, Democrats were saying, we need to impeach him. And he hasn't even been in office yet. And that is what this whole inquiry has been about. They don't like the president. They don't like his policies. But just because you don't like the president or you don't like his policies, that in and of itself is not an impeachable offense. But the Democrats have been focused on getting rid of this president. And Jerry Nadler said so himself last evening that we can't rely on the election to get rid of him. We've got to get rid of him through impeachment. That's what they're focused on. And that in itself is what I mean when I refer to the Democrats weaponizing this impeachment process against the president.
Speaking of that, what do you think, Congressman, of how this whole inquiry, how it's played out, how it's all that's done for the concept of impeachment as a political process in the minds of Americans and how Americans think about these kinds of inquiries?
You know, it's a shame. Our founders gave us the tool of impeachment if indeed the president does something criminal, like bribery, like treason. I mean, that's specifically mentioned, high crimes and misdemeanors. It is an attempt, it is a tool given us by our founders to deal with a president that is involved in criminal behavior or whatever it may be. And that is what's lacking in this whole attempt to go against President Trump. And for that reason, I believe what the Democrats are dragging our country through involving this hoax, sham of an impeachment process that in and of itself has lacked justice in every inch of the way. I mean, we as the minority, we've not even been allowed to call our own witnesses, which, by the way, we are given the right by the House rules that the minority will be given a minority hearing in which they are allowed to subpoena their own witnesses. We've not even been allowed to do that. In fact, last evening, the Democrats voted as a party to not allow the minority party to have the rules exercised in our behavior as they state. It's just phenomenal to me. This has been a partisan party, a sham hoax from the beginning for the purpose of attacking the president and of ousting the president. And I think that really sets us as a country on an extremely dangerous pathway. I think it's unfortunate and it's shameful what the Democrats have done here. Likewise, at the same time, it's shameful what they have not done, and that is to legislate.
But we will continue to watch to see how all this plays out and if indeed it does get to a full vote in the House next week. Congressman Jody Hice, Republican from Georgia, thank you so much for joining us.
Always my honor.
President Trump accuses Democrats of misrepresenting his phone call to the leader of Ukraine, but he's focused on more than just the impeachment investigation. He's also pushing other priorities like maternity leave. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. President Trump is taking a cue from his daughter Ivanka, who wants to improve paid family leave. The president is also paying attention to the impeachment hearings and making it clear he's not happy.
Democrats say the president enlisted a foreign power in corrupting the U.S. election process and endangered national security by asking Ukraine to investigate his rivals while withholding U.S. military aid. The president sees it differently. Today he tweeted, "I also have constantly asked, why aren't Germany, France, and other European countries helping Ukraine more? They are the biggest beneficiaries. Why is it always the good old United States?" The radical left do-nothing Democrats never mentioned this at their phony hearing. The transcript of President Trump's call with Ukraine's president shows the foreign leader wanted to discuss more military cooperation with the U.S. Democrats point out that's when President Trump changed the topic to investigating the Bidens.
The very next sentence is not, yes, let's get with the Department of Defense. Let's review your request. The very next sentence, I would like you to do a favor, though.
President Trump responds, Dems Veronica Escobar and Jackson Lee purposely misquoted my call. I said, I want you to do us, our country, a favor, not me a favor. They know that, but decided to lie in order to make a fraudulent point. Very sad. Still, the president wants to work with Democrats on another priority. He paid a visit to a White House summit focused on paid family leave. President Trump says a quarter of new moms return to work within 2 weeks of giving birth because they can't afford to miss a paycheck.
We want every mother to have the chance to spend those precious few weeks with her newborn or adopted child. And I understand statistically, they show statistically it's so much better for the baby and growing up, even in later years. I can imagine that.
Today, the president also commented on closing a possible trade deal with China. He tweeted, getting very close to a big deal with China. They want it, and so do we. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Britons are casting ballots today in an election billed as a way out of the Brexit stalemate. The contest pits Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who says he will take Britain out of the European Union by the end of January, against opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn, who promises another referendum on Brexit. All 650 seats in the House of Commons are also up for grabs. Israelis are preparing for a third election in 1 year. Legislators passed a motion earlier today to hold elections March 2nd. The agreement came hours after the deadline to form a coalition government expired. It now triggers a nearly 3-month-long campaign ahead of the vote that most polls predict will not produce dramatically different results than the elections that led up to the current crisis. A Wall Street Journal article published yesterday reports the Vatican is using money from its main charitable arm to fill the hole in the Vatican's own administrative budget. According to the report, every year more than $55 billion from Peter's Pence collection goes towards the Vatican's budget deficit. One of Pope Francis' priorities since his election in 2013 has been to improve the Vatican's management and financial problems. EWTN News Vatican analyst Andrea Gagliarducci joins us from Rome. Andrea, welcome back to the broadcast. What is Peter's Pence and how was it developed?
Well, the Peter's Pence is a special collection that faithful from all over the world do for the Pope. It was developed back in 19th century when Italy, the Italian state, was trying to seize the pontifical state. There was a conquer of the pontifical state. And so Catholics from all over the world, mostly from the US, started a collection to help the Pope. Before the Pope had a pontifical state, so he could keep up the state with taxes, and in this way he could keep up the work the church was doing. But without a state, without taxes, you needed some special collection. That's how Peter's Pence developed back in 19th century. And that's why Peter's Pence is now used both for the Holy See and the Holy See balance sheets and Holy See issues and for the poor.
Let's expand on that a little bit more. Andrea, I understand that 10% of the donations go to charitable works, so where exactly does the rest of the money go?
Well, the rest of the money go generally to the dicasteries, to the nunciatures. You need to keep all these institutions up. The nunciatures are, for example, the papal embassies that are all over the world. The pontifical diplomacy is a diplomacy with a number of 173 states, diplomatic ties with 173 states. And these nunciatures are there for the Catholics. You know, they mostly help the Catholics on the ground and wherever. And then the state is needed for the needs of the church because the Pope needs to be helped. And then, you know, all of this money are also invested so that you can have more money and you can use them for the poor. 10% of this is for special provisions for the poor, or, as you know, for special needs. When there was the earthquake in Haiti, for example, or so on and on, the Pope generally sends his donation for the aids.
Well, while we're on the subject of money in the Vatican, how is this related to a recent investigation into the Vatican's real estate investment scandal where reports say it spent over $300 million?
Well, it was related to the Vatican investigation because the investigation was on a fund that was bought by the Secretariat of State. The Secretariat of State is the papal secretary, and so since the Peter's Pence is given to the Pope, is a special collection for the Pope, is the Secretariat of State that handles this money and that invests this money. So that's why it was related with Peter's Pence, and that's why people started thinking why the Peter's Pence is used for investments. Actually, as the Pope said, coming back from Japan in the in-flight press conference, having money does not mean to have them in a drawer. You need to invest them. Charity is a professional issue, even for the Holy See, believe it or not. You know, it's not just about delivering money. It's mostly about making the profit with money and having more money to help the poor. So that's why there was this scandal, because mostly it was investigated the way this real estate, luxury real estate in London was purchased and how the intermediaries played a role in into this purchase, which can happen. You know, sometimes you can have a mismanagement or bad investments, but we'll see if this is the case, because actually the operation was restructured. But the scandal was mostly the so-called scandal was mostly about that, while and it was about Peter's Pence because the Secretary of State handles that.
Very interesting. Well, obviously, we with EWTN News are going to continue to cover the financial investigation and situation of the Vatican. Andrea Gagliarducci, Vatican analyst for EWTN News, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll discuss the declining fertility rates in Denmark. Fertility rates around the world are stalling or at below replacement level. Tonight, we take a closer look at one country facing declining fertility rates, Denmark. Replacement level fertility is defined as the average number of children born per woman at which a population exactly replaces itself from one generation to the next without migration. The United Nations identifies replacement level fertility rates at 2.1 births per woman. According to 2019 data, Denmark's fertility rate currently stands at 1.7 births per woman. Joining me now from Copenhagen to offer her analysis is Iben Thranholm, a Danish journalist and a convert to Catholicism. Iben, welcome into the broadcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
A recent opinion piece in the New York Times entitled "The End of Babies" highlighted Denmark as one of the wealthiest in Europe, yet struggling with declining fertility rates. What do you see as the root cause of the decline?
Well, it's definitely not because people can't afford it. You will have 12 months paid leave, family leave, and the government pays child benefit to all families. And whenever you want to work again, you have childcare for everyone. So we have a very well-functioning system. I think the root cause is spiritual. And we have to go back to the sexual revolution that we had here in the 60s, where we got a separation between sexuality and procreation. And a lot of women and people in general thought that this would be completely harmless. But I think it really had a tremendous effect on our mentality. Because what happened is actually that we were not anymore cherishing the sacredness of life, and that we were not open to life anymore. And I think it bounced back on us. So we got a sort of spiritual crisis, or I would even say a spiritual disease without knowing it. And the spiritual disease is what I would call accidia, which is one of the mortal sins. It can be translated in many ways, like inner boredom, depression, and emptiness. And I think we had not any idea that we would get this kind of spiritual mentality. Pope Benedict XVI also talked a lot about that accidia is a major problem in our culture on many levels. And I think if you're not anymore open to life because of contraception, you have a change of mentality. So I think it is a spiritual crisis that is much deeper than we have acknowledged.
Just to follow up on that, what role do you think secular society in Danish culture, Danish life, plays into this? Whether it's entertainment, the language, what do you think it is?
When I was a child, or I was growing up, we were taught, make love, not babies, because the most important thing in your life is to have an education and a career. And if you're brainwashed with that when you grow up, that a child is an obstacle, of course, you're not going to have a baby when you're 21, that's for sure. And I think a lot of women have this kind of mentality today that a child would be an obstacle. So if you enter into familyhood with that kind of idea that you're not having a family to be open to life and to pass on life, which I think is essential for being a human being, is that you pass on life. Of course, the whole family structure, the whole family, or the whole idea of family is changing enormously.
So, Iben, what do you think can be done to turn this around?
Maybe we could start considering changing our abortion laws, because 15,000 Danish children are conceived every year, but they are not born. But I think the most important thing is to change the mentality and to reconnect with the transcendent, because we're a very secular society. So you got to reconnect with the source of life, which is, of course, God. Because if you're disconnected, you are not open to life, and this is the main problem.
And of course, that's an important thing that everyone should keep in mind around the world, not just in Denmark. Of course, it's interesting, of course, to get a Danish perspective on all this. We appreciate it. Iben Thranholm, Danish journalist, coming to us from Copenhagen. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you so much.
Up next, a Catholic business owner goes all out to decorate his bar for the Christmas season. And thousands of pilgrims celebrate Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico City. On this day 39 years ago, EWTN was formally established and incorporated by Mother Angelica. The network would launch on air 8 months later. EWTN is the largest religious media network in the world, reaching more than 300 million television households in more than 145 countries and territories. Thousands of pilgrims arrived in Mexico City today to commemorate and celebrate one of the most traditional religious festivals in the country. Today is the feast day of Our Lady of Guadalupe, the patron saint of Mexico and all the Americas. Many carry large statues or other images as they stream into the basilica. Others make the last stretch crawling on their knees. In 1531, the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared to the indigenous peasant Juan Diego, and her image was imprinted on his cloak, which is on display inside the church in Mexico City. Juan Diego was declared a saint in 2002 by St. John Paul II. Pope Francis says saints are not unreachable human beings.
Che I santi non sono degli esseri umani irraggiungibili.
The Holy Father met today with members of the Congregation for the Causes of Saints. The meeting marks the 50th anniversary of the department, which examines the lives of candidates for beatification and canonization. The Holy Father said saints are models and guides of Christian life, and that we must learn to see holiness in the patient people of God. Finally tonight, a Catholic business owner and entrepreneur is encouraging the faithful not to lose sight of the true meaning of Christmas. He recently opened a Christmas-themed pop-up bar in the nation's capital, where he hopes to foster a spirit of community among his patrons. On this unassuming street in Washington, D.C., you'll find a place called Miracle on 7th. Outside, it looks like any other building, but inside, it's one of the most festive meetups in the nation's capital. From angels lining the walls to Santa Claus and his reindeer, this hall is decked out. It's the 5th year the bar has done this Christmas theme.
But there is something about the season that people come in and their eyes are lit up and they're so excited by the decorations.
Derek Brown, the owner, is a distinguished fellow at the Catholic University of America, where he often speaks to business students. At this location, he's encouraged rigorous expansion. Miracle on 7th also includes a Hanukkah room and a bar dedicated to the World Series champion, Washington Nationals. While sitting next to toy soldiers and teddy bears, Miracle's prep manager, Jesse Schwartz, told me it took 2 weeks to build this winter wonderland.
From our perspective, there is no detail too small for this bar. We like people to find all the little Easter eggs, all the small intricacies that we hide everywhere around here.
But not all of the decorations are so small. I took exception to one while walking through the Nationals bar. Well, as my friends, family, and EWTN viewers know, I'm a big Houston Astros fan, born and raised in Houston, and I get it, the Washington Nationals won, they beat the Astros, but did they have to put the entire scoreboard of Game 7 in the middle of the bar? Thank you very much. It was good. Brown, a Washington sports fan, did his best to console me. He says regardless of your team loyalty, he wants to welcome everyone who walks in the door. In a subtle way, he says it reflects his own Catholic faith.
We also try to be part of the community at large. I mean, I think that a bar should belong to a community. And that means that we are involved with charity. That means that we reach out to our neighbors.
Brown says this year the bar is raising money for Children's National Hospital, just a small way to help others in need, and to remember the reason for the season, the birth of our Lord and Savior. If you live in or are going to be visiting Washington, D.C. this month, Miracle on 7th is open through December 31st. And that concludes our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.